About your introduction to the piano and what drew you initially to that instrument?
It was in the house where I grew up.
Simple as that.
I mean, well, there was one in the corner.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to play anything, you sort of tended to play what happens to be there.
Yeah.
And it was as simple as that. I started playing the piano because it was in the room.
Growing up
as a piece of furniture.
Growing up in South Africa, what types of music were you discovering there? What access to music did you have?
Well, I had very little, to be honest. I mean, little bits of I almost heard nothing, frankly. Little bits of boogie-woogie, or I had some written music of that. And I heard African music around me all the time. I didn't have to do anything to hear that. And I suppose when we were young, we played a bit of that. But I just wasn't hearing much until I was about 15. And then some friends of mine introduced me to jazz, really, which was Miles Davis and George Shearing and Oscar Peterson. So then the music I was hearing sort of wasn't African, it was American.
And you moved to England. Did that come with hopes of a musical career, or did that come later after you already established yourself there?
Well, I hoped to be able to earn a living. It wasn't so much a big musical career I had in mind. I just thought if I could just get out of South Africa and earn a living in Britain, it would be good, because I didn't want to live in South Africa, really.
Mm-hmm. Looking back on the early days of Manfred Mann, does it bother you now, looking back, that 60s outfit is mainly remembered for its classic singles and not so much for the other great music it was capable of?
Not really. I'm not sure how great anything was. We were imitating American music, let's be fair. And, almost anything we did was probably done better by the guys who'd done the originals. It's just one of those things, if I started feeling bad about that, I'd be, feeling bad about life, sort of getting on with the day rather than worrying about stuff like that.
Nothing to dwell on, yeah. A lot of your...
I mean, it's just, this is sort of 20, 30 years ago. What's the point of worrying about it?
Worrying about it now. A lot of your successes at the time were with Bob Dylan material. Did you receive feedback from Bob or his camp as to what he thought of the covers at the time?
Well, I think in the sort of mid-60s, he was asked whose covers he liked, and he preferred ours to anybody else's. That was at that time, but apart from that, I haven't really heard anything.
I guess around that time, he was looking at going electric himself, so I guess he might have given...
This was after he was electric.
Yeah.
I think it was 68 or something.
Of all those successes in the 60s with that outfit, were there any sessions that you think back on now that you knew once the moment you recorded that song that you knew you had something particularly special on hand?
Well, I always used to feel during the 60s that I could tell whether a record would be successful or not, just by the feel before the vocals were even on. It now sounds an immensely arrogant statement. And it's hard for me to believe that it could have been true, but I do believe it was true, and there were certain times where the band locked in and it just locked and somehow felt right. And those, I would feel, yes, this is going to work.
Now, a lot of your successes have been covers over the years, but just the same, they've always been arranged in a way different to the original. I gather that's important to you?
Well, I'm just a musician. And I decided a long time ago I wasn't a good writer. And therefore I would try and find my way and see what I could record and do it as well as I could. And it always seemed to me to take somebody else's record and copy it wasn't doing something as well as I could.
Yeah.
I wanted to find a way to turn it round and change it and put another spotlight on it.
When doing an arrangement of somebody else's song, do you have a specific process that you go through, how you go about tackling the task?
Well, basically, I learn it on the piano, and then I don't listen to the original. And then I just keep playing it on the piano. And eventually I find a way to do it that is unrelated to the original. Because I'm not double-checking all the time, which means that sometimes I get lyrics wrong. Being Blinded by the Light has cut loose like a deuce on the original. I'm writing Wrapped Up like a douche. It's just completely wrong. But it's because I just wouldn't go back to the original.
Right.
In case I got re-influenced.
So cutting yourself off from the original is probably the key.
Yeah, I would cut myself off from the original, just keep playing it. And some songs you think are going to be great, you play them, and they don't get better and better. Others just get better and better, and then you think, yeah, I'll do this.
Is there a particular quality in a song that you look for to make it one that you'd want to cover?
No, I think it's indefinable.
Yeah?
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Right. Comfortable with past members of Manfred Mann, that the 60s outfit's still touring around and playing the old band hits? Doesn't bother you at all?
It doesn't bother me as long as people know I'm not in it and people don't think it's me. Then it's fine. But sometimes people think I'm involved and they don't read the posters properly and they think it's Manfred Mann, and it's not.
Yeah.
And yes, that aspect of it bothers me. But overall, again, life goes on.
Yeah. But basically, as long as they're honest about it, there's no problem.
Yeah, well, I think they are honest about it. I think that sometimes promoters tend to sort of go along and just put the wrong thing up.
Yeah.
And, that is something I don't want to happen, really.
Did you encounter problems over the years, particularly in the early days of the Earth Band, gaining acceptance by people who remember the other band?
Well, very much so in the early years. Not on stage ever, but from promoters and stuff. In the very, very early years, that I'm talking now 1971. After that, not. There's never people in the audience that are bothered. It's never bothered me. The band as it is very good live, and there's never been a problem.
Right. Just that initial stage you had to get over.
Yeah, the initial period, I think, we were considered very unhip for a while in the early 70s, until we got going, really.
With the Earth Band, is it a case now of you finally getting the chance to produce the music you've always wanted to without placing great emphasis on hit single success or anything like that?
I think as we speak, that's certainly my attitude.
Yeah.
Up until now, I've really always been aware that, if you can get one track that everybody likes around the world, it can change your career. But I think I've got to the point now where I think, well, no, I just want to try and do the best thing I can do. We're finishing a live album now, and the next album that I'm doing, I don't expect there to be hit singles on it, but I'll just try and make the best possible album I can.
Right. You're making records more for yourself now.
Partly because people won't play them anyway. We don't get played anyway, so I may as well make the record for myself.
Yeah, of course. Your bands have had a steady turnover of personnel over the years. Has any stage that been a hindrance at all?
The bands have had a what?
A steady turnover of personnel over the years. Has that been a hindrance at any stage? No,
not really. I think actually the turnover's been very little when you look over the period of time. It's just that, a lot of bands you look at over 3 years and there's one change.
Yeah.
We're changing one person every 3 years. That's all we're doing. There's very little changes, and they take place over quite long periods of time, to be honest. Most people are there for quite a long time once they're in.
You stay in contact with past members?
Well, Mick Rogers, for example, is in the current band, and, he was working with me in 1973. Chris Thompson is back working with us, and he was there for a period and then wasn't there. So in terms of Earth Band, yes, I am. I'm not saying I'm in touch socially, but, there's no bad feeling between me that I'm aware of and anybody I've worked with in Earth Band.
Yeah. How would you sum up your relationship with record companies over the years?
Well, not particularly bad. I've tried in my life, to do the one thing that you probably never hear this from another musician. I've tried to always blame myself when a record failed.
Mm-hmm.
I've always felt that I'm not going to be these people who blame the rest of the world when an album doesn't do well. It's usually because it's not good enough. And I've tried to keep a kind of naive attitude to it, that if you're good enough, you'll get through. And every time we don't get through, it's because we're not good enough.
Now, Germany's a particularly strong market for you, for the Earth Band in particular. Is that any one thing you can put that down to?
No, not really. They're sort of a bit serious there, I think. And they kind of sort of treat music in a very intellectual kind of way, in a sense. And maybe at a certain time in the 70s, that, the kind of thing we were doing struck a chord.
Yeah. You would have seen some great advancements in recording and equipment technology over the years too. Do you think this has been entirely beneficial? Do you think maybe some of the heart and soul has been taken out of recorded performance?
I found very little advances in keyboards, certainly. I think it's, keyboards have gone from playing keyboards for a period anyway into keyboards which produced sounds of other instruments but weren't keyboards. The keyboard, to me, is something that you can play as a keyboard. And I think that for a very long period of time, the advances were just illusory. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, keyboards have got really good again.
Mm-hmm.
But for a long time, I actually don't think. And I think in England, I don't know what's happening in Australia or America, but I think there's a great return to people playing music live. and the record sounding natural and live, and certain things that are classic. There are certain things that don't go away. The shape of the human hand doesn't go away. The acoustic guitar is not going to change much. You know, the shape of a teapot doesn't change. And the people playing music together won't change in the long run. And a lot of things that are seen for a while to be terribly popular and fashionable will eventually resemble the digital watch, which is exactly what's happened in the UK. I mean, there's really a lot of extremely good bands at the moment, and being played more and more.
You personally tackle the recording process much differently today than in the past?
Sorry, say again?
The recording process. Do you tackle that differently today as say, you would have 20...
Oh, yeah, I certainly do. But having said that, I, increasingly am returning to, working more live and trying to be master of the machines rather than the machines telling me what to do. But yes, we do. We would just play before, with very little chance to overdub. Whereas now, I think there are too many options now, which are too time-consuming. But I'm returning to this idea is that you just sit in a room and play together with a minimum of programming. But I find programming extremely useful for sketching ideas, for illustrating things, and for enabling you to collate what you're doing.
Still enjoy the studio environment?
I prefer the live environment many, many times over. Because there's something natural and instant about it, and the studio is a contrived procedure. And that's probably why the band's very good live, because I feel much happier in that situation than I do in the studio, and the records are never quite as good.
Right, so constant touring hasn't lost its appeal to you after all these years still?
Well, we don't constantly tour, frankly. We might tour for 2 months and then stop for the rest of the year. We're not around all the time.
What is the extent of your touring these days?
Well, we usually do the summer and something in October, and then the whole winter and spring we record. So I'm not around all the time. It may change next year, but, every year's different.
What would be a typical Earth Band audience? A good mix of old and new?
The audience?
Yeah, good mix of old and new.
We play?
No, a good mix of old and new fans?
I don't really know. It varies. I would say it's largely old fans, to be honest. I know that's not the answer that's flattering to me, but I think that's the truth.
Right. What would be the chances of a Down Under visit? It's been many years since we've had you down here, I think.
It's really not in my hands, that.
Yeah.
The chances, I think, are pretty remote. I don't think there's much interest in us. And I think the chances are therefore remote. But, we're doing a live album, and that's an easy thing to sort of go out and play the live album, and maybe there would be some residual interest. But I really don't know.
Just run through the current lineup with us.
Well, it's myself, Chris Thompson singing, Noel McCallum singing, Mick Rogers playing guitar and doing a bit of singing, Steve Kinch playing bass, and a guy called John Trotter playing drums. He's fairly new.
And away from the stage and away from the studio, and you get a chance to sit down and listen to music yourself, what are you listening to these days?
Well, I listen to the radio. And in listening to the radio, I get an awful lot of what's going on, and that's very current and very new. Having said that, at home, I probably play old hit records, When I say old hit records, sort of jazz, classical records, or things like Lee Dorsey or old blues. But I don't play records that much. Mainly classical records. But I listen so much in the car to what's going on, but I wouldn't say I listen to anybody in particular at all. But I do try and... There's a very good radio station in England now that finally has DJs who are not patronizing the audience and stuff, quite young people. And I like most of what they play. There's a new radio station. So, that's the way I kind of listen to what's going down.
That's terrific. If you had to pin it down to any one particular thing, what would you put down as the key to survival in the music game for so long? Or as long as you've been?
For me or for anybody?
Well, in general.
Well, my own personal view is that it's been good enough. It's as simple as that. Your determination comes from being good enough. Your determination is not a separate factor that you can just be determined. It comes because you have some innate knowledge that you're good enough.
Simple as that.
That's extremely complex. It's easy to say, but I think it's down to that. If you're good enough, you get through. Most people who aren't good enough don't get through. There's always a few people who hype themselves, or there's always blips in that. So, in a sense, my own view is a very naive one. I have a similar view to what you had as a kid. I just think that if you're good enough, you get through. Now, it's not a popular view because everyone will talk to me about marketing and image and blah blah blah. But in the long run, people like Bob Dylan don't get missed, or Bruce Springsteen. They just don't get missed, or Michael Jackson. They just don't.
Sure. Any regrets at all?
There's lots of talented people who don't make it, but it's not the same as the great people being missed. And there's lots of people who aren't that great that get through for a very short time, but nobody who's no good gets through for a long time.
Cool. Any regrets at all, Manfred? Anything, given the opportunity, you'd like to change?
Sort of musically, we're talking here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I can't think. I don't have it to the forefront of my head, so there's nothing I go around thinking. I think I've been very happy. No, not really.
Okay. And you mentioned you got a live album in the works.
Yeah, it's been finishing up soon now.
Right. Where was that recorded?
Recorded in Germany, 1996.
And we can expect release on that sometime in '98.
I would have thought so, in about 3 months, yeah. We're finishing it as we speak. We're compiling it.
Fantastic. All right, then. Look,
okay.
I won't hold you up any longer. I'm sure you'd like to get back to work there.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, and
okay, it's a pleasure.
All the best, and hopefully maybe we'll get to see you down here one day again.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Manfred. Bye-bye.
Bye.